From the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, this is 50 Years of Air and Space, sponsored by Lockheed Martin. I'm Matt. To celebrate the museum building's 50th anniversary, we're going back in time and behind the scenes to tell you our origin story. From the museum's beginning to the transformations of today, this is our fourth and final episode. Let's get started. We've heard throughout this series that the National Air and Space Museum's building on the Mall was built on time and under budget. That fact is a major point of pride. But in the decades since we first opened in 1976, some problems have arisen from the speedy construction. This is retired curator Dr. Mike Neufeld.
And we paid for that in shortcuts that were made in the course of the building. But I don't think anyone understood back in the 70s that cutting the marble thin like that and hanging it on the frame was a problem over the long haul. But, I can't say that for certain, but it doesn't appear that anybody foresaw that problem. Of course, it took decades to manifest. But clearly, the concern was that we got to keep it under this $40 million figure. It's going to be easier to sell to Congress that we're not, building this huge building and it's just on the same price tag that we originally presented to you back in a decade earlier.
Some changes and upgrades were made to the building over the years. Galleries and exhibits have come and gone, but the base of the building stayed pretty much the same for almost 40 years. Then in 2011, a magnitude 5.8 earthquake shook the DC region. It's not a massive earthquake, and DC itself was not the epicenter, but it was enough shaking that the Smithsonian museums and most other buildings in the city had to be assessed for damage. This is Beatrice Mowry, the museum's head of exhibit design.
After the earthquake, of course, they had to go into the walls and the ceilings to make sure nothing was cracked or broken. They checked all the aircraft cables and everything. And we had been having this weird thing in Explore the Universe, which is a gallery that had dark painted walls. It was a corner gallery, corner of the building. And there was this white stuff on the walls forming. And so they went into one of the hatches that goes into the walls, and they realized that there were no return air ducts, that they just used the space between the stones and the drywall as return space. And what was happening was little microenvironments were happening in there. And I think there was some chemical reaction where there were chemicals leaching out of the stone and somehow making things grow in the gallery. There was some very funky chemical things going on.
The most immediate and visible problem found after the earthquake came from the stone on the outside of the building.
The stones, of course, they look like big 5-foot blocks of stone. They're actually inch and a half veneers. And they sprayed the insulation on the back of the stone. So if you've ever painted a piece of wood on one side and after a while it cups, that's what then started happening. At the same time, they were only held on with 4 little clips. And because of all the microenvironments going on, those clips were rusting and in danger of falling off. So we had to build covered, reinforced walkways around the building.
Once we started looking, the problems started adding up.
And so they started the planning effort, and the planning then it became much more than just a stone replacement project, as we know. I'm Chris Brown and have the privilege of serving as the John and Adrienne Mars Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. But it really required a dismantling of the whole building and the vacating of all the artifacts, which led to the opportunity to redo all these galleries, which has really been the incredible opportunity that we've had.
And it has been an incredible opportunity. To tell more stories, to show more artifacts, to rethink the entire way the museum presents the history of air and space and art and history and American innovation to the visiting public. We call this whole project Transformation. This is Smithsonian Secretary Dr. Lonnie Bunch.
When I was a curator in American history, when I first came back in 88 or 89, and I was super excited. And one of the senior curators said to me, don't worry, this is the Smithsonian. You could put a dead dog on the floor and 5 million people will applaud. always bothered me. But what struck me about Air and Space is you never waited for the dead dog, right? There was always a desire to challenge ourselves, to challenge the exhibitions, to think differently about engaging the public. So, I mean, I've always thought that Air and Space helped lead the way of never satisfied, never resting on your laurels. And I think the new revitalization of it, even though I had to help raise $600 million, but the new revitalization of it is really a testament to that belief that we can always be made better.
Over the more than 10 years that the museum has been working on transformation, the guiding principles have been to bring the museum back better than it was, to inspire new generations of aviation and space enthusiasts.
And coming in, there's having worked large projects for decades now, it's, simply put, there's three components that you always try to hold in balance. It's the schedule, the budget, and the quality. I know that when this building opened, what was stated was on time, on budget, but the budget for it was woefully low. And yes, it was on time, and not, again, casting doubt or fault on anyone, the quality was just not there. I mean, to have to rebuild the entire structure after just 45 years. So having these three components in balance is really, really hard. And rarely are you part of a project where you can get to the end of it saying, we held the schedule, we held the budget, and we've got top quality. It's just the world it's not that convenient.
Our building on the National Mall has more than 20 gallery spaces. Over the 50 years we've been open, about one gallery would be refreshed every couple of years. Over the last 10 years or so of this project, all of them were reimagined in some way as part of transformation.
Well, we did all of our exhibits in-house. So we would design them and build them unless there was some specialty metalwork or something, then we would contract it out. And we would do an exhibit gallery about every other year. And so, which was fine, but there were some very old exhibits. And if you do the math, we have more than 20 exhibit spaces. So you're looking at 40 some years to turn over all the exhibits in the building.
So I wonder, thinking about that, what did transformation present you as sort of an opportunity? And yeah, it's a huge task doing all more than 20 galleries that we've got, but what opportunities were there to do new things?
Well, so just getting back to how we used to do a gallery every other year, this transformation allowed us to do all of the galleries over within 10 years, if you really look at it from the very early stages, which we couldn't have normally done. We would never have undertaken this unless there were a physical reason why we had to do this, right?
We had one of the museum's conservators give us a tour and tell us about objects new to the museum or refreshed for new displays.
My name is Lisa Young. I work at the National Air and Space Museum in the Conservation Unit, and I'm a supervisory objects conservator.
Lisa told us about the conservation efforts for a bunch of different objects, but we're going to tell you about just one in this episode. She took us into the new World War II gallery and told us about a unique collection of model aircraft. Some were already on display before transformation, and some are brand new to this gallery.
Okay, so this case is very interesting. At first sort of look or glance, you see a bunch of airplane models, which is not unique in our museum. They're all over. These are called recognition models. And this has been a sort of conservation nightmare for a while because these models are made of an unstable plastic. So a recognition model was used, it's a silhouette model that was used by people in training to recognize planes in the air. There's a huge collection that we had in the old gallery, many of which were starting to break apart on the wall. So we removed them all from the old World War II gallery. And the question was always like, what can we do to put them back? They're too fragile. Well, they're made of a plastic that's releasing a very toxic chemical naturally over time, and they just break apart. And when they break apart, they turn into gravel. And so we've had people doing PhDs on them, talking with the curator, like, what are we going to do? These are very unique. Some of them belong to Paul Garber. We can't display them. So we have ones that actually have been identified in this case that are stable and don't have that chemical in them. Oh. We have one that does.
And that's the one in the small vitrine.
Yes, it's in a small vitrine by itself. You can kind of see it's like a matte coloring. If there's a paint on the plastic. The curator was insistent that this one be included because of its history. And we worked with him to say, okay, but if it collapses and does what it's supposed to do over time, which is a good experiment, because now it's in a stable environment and maybe it won't. We're all about experiments. Let's put it in this case. So if it collapses and turns to gravel, it's contained. But I don't think this is something that the public is going to ever understand, because, you have a case with models and then you have one in a case by itself.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting story.
Lisa told us about a lot more conservation projects among the new and returning artifacts in the museum, so stay tuned to Airspace Season 12 to hear more of those stories. The artifacts are just part of the way visitors interact with these new galleries. Transformation also gave us the opportunity to bring in new interactive pieces to the galleries. You can push buttons to learn how GPS satellites pinpoint your location. You can lift weights that show you how much heavier or lighter things are on different planets. You can listen to Morse code and try to guess the message, and many, many more interactive and immersive activities.
There were opportunities to increase and improve the media. However, keep in mind that we do not do very bleeding edge interactives because we get so many visitors a year that we have 2 gesture interactives, where you use your body and hands to make something happen. And they are a nightmare to keep going. So there's one in We All Fly and there's one in Early Flight. And we really need to stick with touch screens because that's the safest and easiest to maintain. Our visitors love our exhibits to death, basically. So it was the opportunity to put more media into the exhibits. So we could put more videos, higher quality videos, more computer interactives with greater depth. It also gave us the opportunity to make them more accessible. So all of the computer interactives are handicap accessible. Blind people can use them. They have keypads where you can plug in a headset and you can listen to an audio description of what's going on the screen. It's also an opportunity to add more content in a better way. And all of our exhibits are multimodal. So you have your text on the wall, you have images, but all people don't absorb information that way, especially kids. So one of our goals was to try to really reach 7th grade, middle school age. And so they're used to video games and really cool computer graphic movies. And so we wanted to present information as much as possible in neat, cool ways and dynamic and engaging and interesting ways.
With transformation, even more so than the original museum, you, the visitor, are not meant to be passive. You're reading and watching and playing with the museum.
So when the museum opened, it was really a museum about the history of technology. And it was all about wingspan and what record it broke and how fast did it fly. But there are people behind all of those machines. And we wanted to tell those stories. And not only that, we wanted to show the different people behind the stories. And so I think we did such a wonderful job. And we had been doing that over the last 20 years. We had been adding that more and more into our exhibits, but it was wonderful to be able to just do it fresh and across the board in all of the exhibits, so that people can see themselves when they come in here, to go into those fields, to have those careers, to pursue those things, to drive a rover on Mars or make spacesuits.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing where we've expanded those people stories too is we're not just telling the stories of the pilots. It's people
Correct.
Who work in
the astronauts,
every
right?
part
Yeah, right.
of the apparatus that makes it
the
possible.
Support system, yes, and the scientists and the engineers, and there's one interactive that's going to be in a gallery that's opening in the fall, At Home in Space, and it asks you questions about what you're interested in, and then it shows you careers where you could pursue with those interests. Everyone is exposed to so much in their everyday lives, the level of technology and how information is fed to you, through social media, Instagram Reels, TikToks, and I think they like seeing videos and snippets of things. And that's, an exhibit is not a place for a curator to put their dissertation. It is a place to pique someone's curiosity. And that's what all of that social media stuff does. There are short little videos or whatever, clickbait, I guess is what it's called nowadays. And that's what we're kind of trying to do in the exhibits. Like, if you find a story really compelling and there's only a paragraph about it, you have, the encyclopedia in your pocket, in your phone. You can look it up.
2 final transformed galleries are going to be opening this fall. But that won't be the end of changes to the museum. On the east end, the part closest to the Capitol building, we're building a whole new addition to the museum. This final piece of transformation includes a restaurant on the ground floor.
The other thing when I got here, there was no plans for a restaurant. And I thought, okay, we're going to rebuild this into this incredible museum and its legacy and 6 to 7 million people a year, and there's no food offering. And so that became a task of its own.
And upstairs will be a new purpose-built education space.
So the Bezos Learning Center is going to be a space that we're designing for youth and teachers primarily. Hello, everyone. My name's Tina Menendez. I'm the Bezos Learning Center director at the National Air and Space Museum. Ultimately, with the goal of expanding our reach and working with families and people of all abilities, but initially will be middle school and high school students and teachers on professional development. And it'll be programmed, and so it won't be open to the public.
What Tina means by programmed is that the center will run different activities and classes specifically for each group that comes in. It's designed for students to spend a day learning by solving real-world problems.
A lot of times school can be incredibly rigid. I was a former teacher and a former school administrator, so I understand what it takes to be in a classroom throughout the day. And we want to create a space that allows youth to be free, to be able to geek out about something that excites them, to learn something new that maybe they weren't exposed to before, and to try to expand their horizons of what's possible for them. And so some of the things could be solving for space junk. Some of them could be, how do we work on climate gentrification in our community? Some of them could be, how could we access clean water?
There will be spaces where students can use tools like 3D printers to build models and prototypes, and places where students can collaborate, and also spaces where they can just hang out. That new East End will also include a redesigned observatory and an outdoor space that will be open all the time.
So what's going to be really cool is, in addition to the Bezos Learning Center, the Phoebe Waterman Haas Public Observatory will also be built there. Then there's also going to be an astronomy park built with that. And so there'll be large planets, there'll be a prism and a sundial. And I think part of that is that the goal is to just make sure that everyone understands that astronomy is for everyone. And how do you enter astronomy? You can enter it at any point in any way. And so it's going to be open 24 hours. The planets will be lit at night, which will be super pretty, but also engaging. And so we're trying to make sure that people feel that there's an entry point for them wherever their comfort level is in terms of science and space.
That's the final stage of the transformation of the building downtown. Then, the time and attention that we've dedicated to completely revamping the mall building are moving, at a smaller scale, out to the museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia, for an expansion that will allow us to put even more of our collections on display.
So that is our next big project. The Udvar-Hazy Center, we're going to expand the north end of the hangar by, I think it's 44,000 square feet. So linearly, it's 200 feet. Because we're out of room, you get a new object and it takes up a lot of room. The Udvar-Hazy Center has been open for 23 years now. And there are things that, again, like anything, worked, didn't work. We're not going to overhaul it like we did this building, thank goodness. But we would really like to improve it.
Certainly the completion of transformation and the follow-on project at Hazy and even the Bezos Learning Center, these projects will all wrap and be complete by the end of 28. And I think, the museum will be in the enviable position of having truly world-class sustaining facilities that will allow folks to really divert more of their attention to their stated professions in a very external-facing way.
At the end of these projects, the National Air and Space Museum will be more than ready to take on the next 50 years and beyond. The work is never done. The scientists and historians at the museum will keep researching, learning, and sharing. And as technology changes and more scientific discoveries are made, we'll continue to update and change the exhibits and the galleries. On a personal note, I've been at the museum for a little more than 10 years now, and this project has consumed my professional life as a curator for that entire time. What I'm really looking forward to is how we change as a museum going forward. These galleries are wonderful, and they're really just the beginning. We have so many more stories to tell about what's going to happen next in spaceflight, in aviation, and in my case, planetary exploration and planetary science. I'm really looking forward to collecting new generations of spacecraft and rovers and other technologies that we use to explore the planets and putting those on display for the public, making space for them in these new, wonderful galleries. This is the final episode of 50 Years of Air and Space. We hope you had a great time. To learn more about the history of the museum and the research we do, go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3. Airspace will be back with new episodes starting in October. 50 Years of Air and Space and the Airspace podcast are from the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. It's produced by Jennifer Weingart and mixed by Tarek Fuda. 50 Years is hosted by me, Dr. Matt Schindel. Our managing producer is Erica Novak. Our production coordinator is Joe Gurr. Our social media manager is Amy Stom. Our intern is Sophia Foradori. Special thanks to our guests in this episode, Dr. Mike Neufeld, Beatrice Mowry, Museum Director Chris Brown, Smithsonian Secretary Dr. Lonnie Bunch, Lisa Young, and Dr. Tina Menendez. For additional content, photos, and more, follow Airspace Pod on Instagram. Check us out on the museum's YouTube page, or sign up for our monthly newsletter using the link in the show notes. Airspace is sponsored by Lockheed Martin and distributed by PRX.